I shove my last 2 cardboard boxes out onto the blistering driveway as the heat of Tucson, Arizona scorches the back of my neck. The sun hangs overhead like a weight pressing down on everything, turning the air thick and dry. Behind me, the apartment door slams shut with a sound that echoes through my chest, followed by the landlord's lock clicking into place with a cold, metallic finality that feels like the closing of a chapter I wasn't ready to finish. My grip slips on the largest box. It tilts sideways in my hands, too heavy, too awkward, and before I can steady it, it crashes to the ground. The tape splits open and my things spill across the concrete. Old books, a jacket I haven't worn in years, a picture frame that cracks against the pavement. I crouch down, sweat dripping into my eyes, burning and blurring my vision. My fingers tremble as I try to gather everything back together, forcing the box upright again, trying to hold it all together when nothing feels like it will stay together anymore. When I finally lift it, something moves behind it. A shadow shifts where no shadow should be. I freeze, my breath catching in my throat. The box hovers in my hands, halfway between the ground and my chest, and I can't move. A low whimper cuts through the silence. Then I see it, a trembling body pressed against the wall, 2 frightened eyes staring back at me from behind my scattered belongings. The dog doesn't run. He just shakes, his whole body vibrating with fear, ribs visible beneath matted fur caked with dust. One paw lifts slightly off the ground, hovering, like he's been running too long or from something too cruel. He watches me with a kind of terror I recognize instantly, something raw and exposed, something that mirrors what's been building inside me for weeks. My hand reaches out instinctively, palm open, fingers extended toward him. And he shrinks back, trembling so hard it echoes inside my own chest. If you've ever lived a day where everything fell apart at once, where the ground beneath you just disappeared without warning, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Your presence here means more than you know. This story isn't easy to tell, but maybe it's one you need to hear. Maybe it's one I need to share. The dog keeps watching me from behind the boxes, his eyes never leaving mine. I take a breath, steadying myself against the heat and the weight of everything that just happened, unsure what comes next, but knowing I can't just walk away. Not from this. Not from him. My name is Michael Aaron Whitford, and until that morning, I lived in Tucson, Arizona. My life wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was familiar. A steady routine, a quiet apartment on the east side of town, a place that felt like mine even if the lease said otherwise. I had my coffee in the same mug every morning, took the same route to work, came home to the same 4 walls that held everything I owned. It wasn't much, but it was stable. It was predictable. And somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that predictability was enough. Still, something inside me had been cracking long before that door closed behind me. A small fracture that I ignored, that I walked around carefully, pretending it wasn't spreading. The kind of crack you don't notice until the whole structure comes down. For months, I'd been losing sleep without realizing how fast the bills were stacking up. Work had been good, then inconsistent, then barely enough to cover the basics. The rent increase notice arrived in March, slipped under my door like it was nothing, like it wasn't announcing the end of everything. I read it once, then tucked it into a drawer, hoping ignorance would buy me time I didn't have. I thought if I didn't look at it, if I just kept moving forward, something would change. Someone would throw me a lifeline. The universe would course correct. But the universe doesn't work that way. Then the phone call came. Sharp, unexpected, merciless. The landlord's voice was professional, distant, like he was reading from a script. 7 days. I had 7 days to vacate the place I called home. 7 days to pack up 3 years of my life and figure out where to go when I had nowhere to go. My world flipped. The stability I depended on evaporated overnight, turning into something I couldn't hold on to no matter how hard I tried. I packed my things mechanically, moving through the apartment like a ghost, trying not to fall apart while every piece of my life went into boxes. Each item I wrapped felt like a small defeat. The books I'd never finished. The kitchen supplies I'd bought thinking I'd learn to cook. The photos I kept meaning to frame. All of it reduced to cardboard and tape. And in that fragile silence, as I sealed the last box and carried it to the door, something else was about to break open. Something I couldn't have predicted. Something that would change everything. The midday sun made the scattered boxes look like a broken inventory of my life spread across the pavement. Everything I owned, exposed and disorganized, baking in the Arizona heat. The concrete shimmered, the kind of heat that distorts the air and makes you question what's real. I stood there, staring at the mess, trying to figure out my next move when I didn't have a next move. Then I heard it. A thin, shaky whine, barely audible over the hum of distant traffic, but unmistakable once I tuned into it. Behind the biggest box, tucked against the wall where the shade offered maybe a degree of relief, I saw him. A skinny dog, fur matted with dust and what looked like dried mud, ribs faintly visible beneath his coat. His eyes were wide with fear, pupils dilated, watching me with an intensity that felt almost human. One paw hovered slightly off the ground, trembling, like he'd been running too far or from something too cruel. When I shifted my suitcase to get a better look, he flinched. His whole body jerked backward, but he didn't flee. He stayed pressed against that wall, trapped between fear and something else, exhaustion, maybe, or resignation. His tail was tucked so tightly beneath him it was almost invisible. I crouched down slowly, keeping my distance, trying to make myself smaller, less threatening. "Hey," I whispered, though I don't know why I thought words would matter to him. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Not for him, not for me. We both knew it. His eyes stayed locked on mine, unblinking, searching. And in that moment, looking at him, I saw something I recognized instantly. The same fear I'd been carrying for weeks. The same feeling of being displaced, of having nowhere safe to land, of existing in a world that suddenly didn't have room for you anymore. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the sandwich I'd packed that morning, turkey and cheese, wrapped in paper, the only meal I had left. I tore it in half, the bread splitting unevenly, and extended one piece toward him. He didn't move, just stared at the food, then at me, calculating risk against hunger. I set it on the ground between us and backed away. Waited. Watched. He inched forward, belly low to the ground, every muscle tense and ready to bolt. When he reached the sandwich, he grabbed it in one quick motion and retreated, swallowing it so fast I wasn't sure he even tasted it. Then he looked at me again, and something in his expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something close. I didn't know it then, sitting on that scorching pavement with my life packed into boxes and this terrified dog watching me from the shadows. But that moment was the beginning of everything. The point where my story stopped being just about survival and started becoming something else. Something I couldn't name yet, but could feel forming in the space between us. I sank onto the curb, letting my shoulders drop, my hands dangling between my knees. The weight of the day pressed down on me, and for the first time since the eviction notice, I let it. I didn't fight it. I just sat there, feeling everything I'd been trying to hold back, and it was exhausting and necessary at the same time. The dog inched closer, still shaking, still wary, but unwilling to leave. He circled my feet once, hesitant, his nose twitching as he tried to figure me out. When I adjusted one of the boxes, he jumped, but this time he didn't back away. He stayed within reach, watching, waiting. I offered him the other half of my sandwich. He hesitated longer this time, but eventually lunged forward, starving, desperate. As he ate, I felt something in me soften too. A slow, almost invisible shift, like a door I'd kept locked for months, was starting to crack open. That night, I slept in my car in a grocery store parking lot. It wasn't legal, probably wasn't safe, but it was all I had. I left the back window cracked for air, the seats folded down to make room for my body, and tried to convince myself this was temporary, that I'd figure it out, that tomorrow would be better. Around midnight, I heard scratching at the door. Soft, persistent. I sat up, disoriented, and saw him through the window. The dog, standing there, looking at me with those same frightened eyes. I opened the door. He climbed in without invitation, settling into the small space near my feet, tucking himself into the only corner available. He didn't ask permission. He just stayed like he'd made a decision and I was part of it now. Every morning after that, I woke without a home, without a plan, without any sense of what came next. But I wasn't waking alone. He slept beside me near the car, tucked into the only slice of shade the wall offered when the sun came up. His presence filled the silence that used to crush me. I started calling him Buddy, not because the name meant anything special, but because that's exactly what he had become. A companion in a situation where companionship felt impossible. When I picked up temporary work, odd jobs, day labor, anything that paid cash, he waited by wherever I parked. If I left him in the car with the windows down and water in a bowl, he'd sit in the driver's seat, watching the door like everything he had depended on me coming back. And maybe it did. I bought him food before I bought myself food. Found a discount bag of kibble at a corner store and rationed it carefully, making sure he ate every day even when I skipped meals. His ribs started to fill out. His coat, once matted and dull, began to show hints of brown and tan beneath the dirt. He limped less, flinched less. We developed routines without discussing them. Morning walks around whatever parking lot we'd ended up in. Evening sits on curbs or benches, watching the sun drop behind the mountains that ring Tucson. I'd talk to him sometimes, telling him things I couldn't tell anyone else. He'd listen, his head tilted slightly, his eyes focused on mine like he understood every word. Something was returning to life. Not all at once, not in some dramatic revelation, but in small increments. In the way he pressed against my leg when trucks drove by too fast. In the way I stopped checking my phone obsessively, stopped spiraling into worst-case scenarios every hour. In the way mornings felt a little less impossible when I opened my eyes and saw him there, waiting. One afternoon, during a rare cool spell when clouds moved across the sky and dropped the temperature just enough to breathe easier, I walked with Buddy through a small park on the north side. It wasn't much, a few benches, some struggling grass, a playground no one used, but it was quiet, peaceful. I sat on a bench and closed my eyes, letting the breeze move across my face. For the first time since the eviction, since that door slammed shut and the lock clicked into place, the future didn't terrify me. It still wasn't clear. I still didn't have answers. But the panic that had been living in my chest, that constant tightness that made every breath feel like work, had loosened. Then I felt it. His paw, gentle and deliberate, touching my leg. I opened my eyes and looked down. Buddy was sitting beside the bench, his head tilted up toward me, his eyes soft in a way they hadn't been when I first found him. Slowly, carefully, he rested his head against my knee, not asking for anything, just offering something: trust, connection, presence. In that moment, something inside me finally let go of the weight I'd been carrying. Not all of it, some burdens don't disappear that easily, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to believe that maybe I'd find my way through this. That maybe we'd find our way through this together. By the end of that month, I'd managed to rent a small room in a shared house on the south side of Tucson. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a window that looked out onto a dusty yard, a bed frame someone left behind, and the closet barely big enough for my boxes. But it was solid ground beneath my feet. It was a door I could close. It was mine, at least for now. Buddy climbed the 3 little steps to the porch beside me, his tail low but hopeful, like he knew this was ours now. He paused at the threshold, sniffing the air, cautious the way he'd been cautious about everything at first. I left the door open as he wandered inside, his nails clicking softly against the worn wooden floor, investigating every corner like he was verifying this place belonged to us both. I leaned against the doorway, watching him explore, letting the quiet settle around us. The house smelled like old wood and dust and something faintly floral from the neighbor's garden. The afternoon light filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the empty room. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I'd lost. But it was something new. Buddy circled the room twice, then returned to me, sitting at my feet and looking up with those eyes that had changed so much since that first day behind the boxes. The fear was still there, buried beneath the surface, but it didn't define him anymore. Just like the panic didn't define me anymore. I slid down the doorframe and sat on the floor. He moved closer, pressing against my side, his warmth spreading through my shirt. I rested my hand on his head, feeling the softness of his fur, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Life wasn't back to what it had been. It would never be what it had been. But it was becoming something new. Something I couldn't have imagined when I was sitting on that curb with my life in boxes and no idea where to go. And that new beginning had paws. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt like everything was falling apart and didn't know how you'd put it back together, I'd love for you to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your presence here means everything, and I want you to know you're not alone in whatever you're facing. I glance at Buddy, curled peacefully near the door, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of sleep. He's home now. We both are. I thought I was saving him, but he saved me.